for coming. My name is Kay Conway, and on behalf of myself, Phil Pecorino, my co-organizer, and Chairman Terry Martell, I want to welcome you to CUNY's Fall Conference on Online Education, sponsored by the University Faculty Senate. We have a great panel of speakers today, including administrators and faculty and activists and researchers. I'm not going to say any more about them because I have a wonderful group of moderators who have agreed to introduce both themselves and the speakers as we progress throughout the morning. At the end of each speaker's presentation, there will be an opportunity for questions, and at the end of the full program, lunch will be served right through those doors. If you feel faint before then, you can duck out. Just not while the Chancellor's talking. I'd also like to thank President Travis and the staff here at John Jay who do such a great job and who make their facilities available. I'd also like to thank York College. Jason in the back is videotaping on our behalf, as well as the staff of the University Faculty Senate who do all the behind-the-scenes work to make a day like today possible. Now, without further delay, let me introduce Chancellor James B. Milliken, who, as you know, joined us in June after a decade at the University of Nebraska. And perhaps many of you have had the opportunity to meet him or to hear him speak. He embarked on a campus tour throughout the summer, and he's really extended himself this fall, attending a variety of events to meet all of his CUNY constituents. The Chancellor is a big proponent of online education. As recently as this week, he spoke at the Association for a Better New York Breakfast, where he talked about a digital CUNY, and where he correctly stated that distance education is a misnomer, that oftentimes it's more about flexibility than geography. His recent budget also included a $7 million request to expand online education. So I hope you'll join me in warmly welcoming Chancellor Milliken.
Thank you. So this morning when I got up and was planning to go run, I noticed that this whole conference is being filmed and put on the web. And since I didn't think it was probably a very good idea for me, in light of the topic of the conference and my advocacy, to forbid it from being on the web, I thought I'd better write some things down. So I'm not going to be my usual unscripted, freeform self. And it did prevent me from running, so, but I can do that some other time. Anyway, I'm delighted to be here today to kick this off, and I'm very pleased with the topic of the conference. Some of you know I have some history with this subject. I taught my first fully online course in 1997, I think. It was a doctoral seminar, and I used Lotus courseware. I'm sure you all use that today. But I'm not here today to prescribe the use of Lotus courseware or what should be happening at CUNY, specifically with online teaching and learning. My real interest is that we acknowledge the importance and possibilities, and that we aggressively explore how access can be expanded, quality enhanced, and students and New York better served through the use of technology. Also, something I'm happy to talk a little bit more about later, and it has to do with why I had Nebraska join Coursera, is that I thought it was one more opportunity for faculty who were interested to have the opportunity to take advantage of technology to expand and improve teaching and learning, and to have a much broader platform for their work. So I taught this doctoral seminar. It was a remarkable experience. It informed much of what I thought in the early years about online learning. It also demonstrated for me early on a couple of things that I think a lot of people don't realize. And maybe it was just me, but I felt that the work, having just done the same course around a Harkness table the semester before, was more labor-intensive with the online course. So this sort of outdated notion that you're going to put things on a, well, it used to be put it on a video disc and send it around the world and you're going to educate millions, save money, eliminate labor, I think is completely off base. And that was probably one of the most important lessons I learned. Then the second was the richness of the experience and the depth that my students and I were able to reach in the subject, and frankly, how much better I got to know them. I was a vice president of the university system at that point, and I didn't have a lot of time to spend with my students, and I got to know them much better in that environment. So a couple years later, I served on a national commission for an organization called Nostalgic, which doesn't exist by that name anymore, so that was a while ago. It was a task force on cyber education in the late 90s. It sounds a little threatening for what we're talking about today. Later, I served on the Sloan Commission on online learning, which produced a couple of volumes maybe about 10 years ago or so on the subject. But then I became a university president. And I had the opportunity to draw on these experiences and to lead an effort to reconfigure the online learning platform and the strategies at my university. So that process was also highly instructive to me. And I think it was quite successful. And not everyone would agree. You could get on the phone and find plenty of people who didn't. But I've become pretty comfortable with the idea that universal agreement in a university environment is pretty tough to come by. So we significantly expanded the number of courses and degree programs at all levels. We dramatically increased our market presence and the revenue from online offerings. We encouraged and incented the development of degree program in areas of high demand. And we did this with one brand across the system and one brand promise, which was the same courses taught by the same faculty and the same high quality. And there are a lot of ways to do this. As you know, we explored many of them, but that was, at the end of the day, what we called an integrated academic environment strategy with our faculty, who were also teaching in the classroom, was the strategy we adopted, and I think it was the right one at that time. So I'd be happy to, at some point, share more of the years of experience I had with developing this model and implementing it, but we don't have time for that today. So for purposes of this introduction and encouragement this morning, suffice it to say that I think online education is certainly here to stay and will occupy an increasingly important share of the market, and that's true whether you're in Nebraska or New York City or China. The landscape of higher education is changing dramatically at a time when it is universally understood that higher levels of education attainment are essential for economic competitiveness of a region, of a country. The United States has moved from first in the world to about 15th in the world for the demographic, at least the demographic 25 to 34-year-olds. So I think as we're under increasing pressure to effectively, cost-effectively educate more and more people, that online education and the effective use of technology will have a great deal to do with how well we do in that field. So I'm sure in some ways that we are leaders today. I'm sure that many of you in this room have had much deeper and richer experience than I have had with online education. So I'm not going to try to give you much advice, but I'm going to tell you an anecdote that I think is somewhat telling about some sorts of untested kind of traditional assumptions. So in what I call one of the paradoxes of CUNY, I was told when I arrived that one of the reasons that we had not focused as much as some in the use of technology in education is because who needs distance education when you have a campus every subway stop in the city? So, as you know, technology, and even what we would call online education, is transforming teaching and learning in ways that go well beyond the use over geographic distance, using new tools, new platforms in the classroom, blending learning opportunities, transforming the way teaching is done and learning is done. But even if we confine the discussion to what was traditionally known as distance learning, some of the assumptions don't stand up. So when I first started getting into this in Nebraska and wanted to understand more about our market for online courses, I asked for a deeper dive into the data on our many students who were taking undergraduate courses online. And I thought I was going to learn that, like many of our graduate programs, they were distributed around the world, like mine in 1997, which had people in the South Pacific in my course with 12 students. What I found was that in the undergraduate courses, 70% of all credit hours were taken by students who were matriculating physically at the university, often living on campus. And so at that point it changed the way I thought about this, that despite the fact that you could use it, and we had used it to teach thousands of miles away, they're often delivered around the corner. And so, to me, no matter how well CUNY does, and it does better than almost any place in the country, in one city, offering so many opportunities for the physical delivery of a learning environment, it's hard to beat 24-hour asynchronous delivery. And especially important for the student population that we serve, juggling work, family, other obligations with pursuing a degree. With greater online presence, we could offer some of our most subscribed classes online, reach more students, eliminate bottlenecks that impede progress, capture a wider market for both undergraduate and graduate programs, and in continuing adult education, which all of this, I think, is right at the heart of CUNY's mission. So also I read all the time about our graduates who, when they leave, will have to retool for changing careers. I can never believe the statistics I hear. One of them was you're going to change careers 7 times by the time you're 40 or something. But whatever it is, we know that graduates today are not those of a couple of generations ago that will find a job when they leave and stay in that job throughout their career. They will retool. We will offer opportunities for them to advance and change careers. I think much of this will be done online. And I want those students, when they leave, to be comfortable with online learning so that they can do this, take advantage of it. And I want them to understand the quality offered by CUNY online and have us be the first place they turn to continue their learning. So since 1847, at the core of CUNY's mission has been to offer access broadly to the broadest possible audience at a low cost and high quality. In my mind, there's no question that technology can be a great tool in the hands of you and other outstanding faculty at CUNY to help us achieve that mission in new ways in the 21st century. And that's what I mean by CUNY becoming digital CUNY. So thanks very much. I look forward to learning more about today's work. I wish I could stay, but I have to go tape a television show where maybe I'll talk a little bit about this conference and digital CUNY. Thanks very much for having me.
Thank you, Chancellor. We're glad you delayed your morning run. I'm Bobby Brody. I work in the Graduate School of Library and Information Studies at Queens College, and it's my pleasure and honor to introduce Tony Picciano. Tony says that perhaps the thing he's most proud of is finishing his 45th year as a colleague here at CUNY. He is professor and executive officer in the PhD program in urban education at the Graduate Center of CUNY, and a member of the faculty at in the graduate program in education leadership at Hunter, the doctoral certificate program in interactive pedagogy and technology at the CUNY Graduate Center, and CUNY Online BA program in communication and culture. In addition to his extensive experience in education administration, he has a great blog on the CUNY Commons called Tony's Thoughts. So with no further introduction, Tony Picciano.
Thank you very much, Bobby. I appreciate the introduction, and I thank you for keeping it low-key. I had a different introduction today, but after hearing the Chancellor, I felt I had to dovetail into some of the things he said. But first and foremost, I want to thank Kay and my colleagues in the UFS for inviting me. I can think of no better honor than to be asked to talk about some topic of interest with colleagues like you. But I had a totally different opening. I was going to go back to the 1960s and who was in charge of technology here at City University. If you want to hear that story, I'll save it maybe for the end. But after listening to the Chancellor, I have to have a slightly different take on my morning. When I woke up this morning, I used to jog in the morning, but now I have to do physical therapy to keep my arthritic knees in shape, particularly for this walk from the subway in the west wind on 59th Street. The second thing, the Chancellor mentioned that he did his first course in 1997, which happens to be the year I did my first course here at City University of New York. Although we dabbled in 1996, there was a group of us at then the 57th Street Computer Facility, thanks to the generosity of Mike Robato, who's no longer with us, who would buy the release time of about 6 or 7 of us faculty and just have us explore and play with things. And so some of us started doing some online work. I see Bill Bernhardt here, who's part of that group. I don't see Tom Supernant, but he was from Queens College. Joe Ratner from Lehman College. So, but in 1996-97, we were doing this work. And in 1997, we did not have any kind of platform at CUNY. Matter of fact, Lotus Notes would have been something good. We had to develop our own HTML, and I was using this beta version of listserv. I mean, most of you know listserv. And what it did was it gave you a threaded list on a web. And it was a beta version which actually CUNY never released, but because of a contact or two at 57th Street, they let me use it. So the other thing I want to say in terms of the Chancellor is a new face. I think it's the dawn of a new era here at CUNY in terms of technology. But I'll say one more thing, that back in the spring, when it was announced that he was coming, I contacted a very good colleague of mine. Her name is Mary Nemec, who used to be at the University of Illinois Chicago, who moved to University of Nebraska and worked for Chancellor Milliken. And I said, what do you know about this guy? What do you think about him? She says, I'm applying for the next job at CUNY. And she says, let me know, and that's how much she appreciated him, I guess, and was sorry to see him go. Anyhow, we wish him great luck, and we give him all our good wishes in terms of having come before us so early in his tenure here. Okay, without further ado, let me get into this presentation. Now, for those of you who've heard me speak in other places, there was another thing. He said he was going to be careful because he was being taped. I really don't care, to be quite honest with you. If you've been to my blog, I really don't mind slamming a lot of movers and shakers in universities and in the country. So I don't care, and I'll say what I want. I don't have a prepared speech. I have some memory joggers in terms of what I have, but I'm willing to say anything, and I'll answer as candidly as I can. So let me start this in terms of I have a lot more material here than I can do in a half hour. That's my time. And so what I did was I asked Bill, and I thank Bill for having a handout. And if you didn't get it, please get it, because it's a one-pager. There's a lot of details on that I will not have the time to cover, but I will touch base with them as best I can. So the title of this talk is The Fourth Wave, the Online Learning Landscape. And I'm going to use the metaphor of a wave, if I may, in terms of looking at where we've been, because I can't talk about the present landscape nor talk about the future without having some background of where we've been. And I've used the metaphor of the wave, and I'm really talking about the full waves of online learning. I'm saying this begins in the 1990s. Some of you might say, oh, we've been doing online work back to the 60s and 70s. That's true, but the internet and the World Wide Web, where students and faculty can access all this wonderful technology in their homes, put a whole other level of distance and online learning at our disposal, both as faculty and as students. And so I'm starting in the 1990s with this. And I want to talk about each of these waves, the first three waves, fairly briefly, and then I'll spend a lot more time on the fourth wave. So the first wave is in the 1990s. And what's important here is that the major theme is we were just trying to figure out what to do. How do we do this? We've already mentioned twice in the space of a half hour, there were very rudimentary software tools, and you had to work hard to do this. Only the people who were most interested in working with this were able to do it, particularly in the early and mid-90s. It eased up a little bit in the late 90s, but there were no course management systems. You had to develop a lot of your own stuff. It took a lot of work to put up a course, and it was not an easy task. And it was great experiences. I'm glad to hear that the Chancellor felt that that was an important experience, and he kept going back to it in his talk today. And many of us who did that work in the 1990s, we still remember all the lessons we learned. Because while the technology has changed rapidly, a lot of the pedagogical principles have stayed the same. Things like reflection, collaboration, deep reading, students expressing themselves. Those pedagogical principles have stayed with us, a lot of which were established in the 1990s with very, very rudimentary software tools. And the other important part of this is that in the 1990s, it was basically faculty-driven in many of our institutions, the exceptions being the for-profit institutions, the University of Phoenix's. They were pouring tens of millions of dollars into the development of their online programs. But for many of the mainstream institutions, these were faculty-driven activities by people who just wanted to test the technology. And to some degree, many of us had, I would say, successful experiences with that. And not just here in CUNY, but around the country, so that by the time the turn of the century, there were hundreds of thousands of students enrolling in online courses using basically very, very rudimentary tools. From there, we went into the second wave. And the second wave is where we moved from trying to do things and experimenting where we thought deeply about pedagogical issues. And what happened was many of the colleges, especially those in mainstream higher education, the public institutions like a University of Central Florida, a University of Illinois at Chicago, even CUNY and SUNY, a lot of the faculty started saying, we don't have to do everything online. And the cliche was we could do the best. We could take the best of online and the best of face-to-face education and put it together in what we call the blended model. Now, I know at CUNY here we use this hybrid model, and I tease George about once a month about why do you use the term hybrid. I like the term blended much better. But in any case, a lot of us started to do it for pedagogical reasons, that we felt that there was something important that we can do online, and there was something we can do important that was face-to-face. But essentially what drove this second wave was pedagogy. There was no particular cost effectiveness of blended learning. Some people try to make the case in terms of there are indirect costs, people staying in college. I agree with that. But in terms of direct cost, there was not a whole lot of direct cost savings with blended learning. And a lot of the people who did it for just to be better teachers, hoping that their students would learn. It was a little bit more convenient for their students to learn. The Chancellor talked about his students living on campus. I taught at Hunter College at the time on 68th Street and Lexington Avenue. I had students on 71st Street, living on 71st Street and 2nd Avenue, taking my online courses. And I made a conscious decision, as a lot of people around the country did, a lot of faculty around the country, particularly in mainstream higher education, that we can do better if we combine these two. And so we had this period in the early 2000s, which I say was pedagogically driven and resulted in what we call this blended learning approach. And I'll come back to this at the end because I was asked to make some comments about blended learning, which I will, but I'll come back to this in a few minutes. In 2008, there was a very important event. George Siemens. How many of you know George Siemens? Okay. George Siemens offers the first MOOC course. He was affiliated with both the University of Manitoba and Athabasca University. I don't know the University of Manitoba, but I did visit Athabasca in terms of an accreditation visit for Middle States around 2002. Do you know where Athabasca is? It's in north central Alberta. There's nothing there. It's a scene out of Fargo, if you've seen the movie. And you travel from the big metropolis of Edmonton for about 200 miles to get to Athabasca, through snow, and all you see is snow forever. When you get to Athabasca, there's a couple of stores, and then there's this beautiful campus, about 8 buildings. And there's a beautiful president's residence. You know what? There's no people there. Athabasca is strictly a distance education institution. It is like the Open University of Canada. And we would go through the halls, and we're getting tours, and there's no people, except for one building. That was the courseware distribution center. Now, it's hard to describe it, but you have to think of an assembly line with people putting books in boxes and videotapes, kind of like how Amazon works. But that's what they did. And that was the hub of activity at Athabasca University. That's just a side. Anyhow, George